Okay, hello guys. Welcome to this recording where I'll do the next problem set, which is problem set 6 for chapter 9, uncertainty. And this is also the last chapter before your exam. Like whatever you learn in chapter 10 and 11, which is game theory, that won't go on your midterm that's coming up soon, right? But whatever you learn from 6 to 9, which is externalities, perfect competitive markets, monopolies, and now uncertainty and risks, these are things that will be tested. So it's good to, starting next week, for you guys to do the sample exam, and even better, the questions that you'll see in the extra practice and what. So before I go into our lesson today, though, I first want to remind you guys, let me share my screen, to do the survey for TA sessions. And this is completely fine if you aim to a TA session or not, okay? It's here, you see survey and TA sessions. We'd love to hear feedback. And the point is, it's not if you only came, even if you didn't come, it's fine. Just do it. There'll be some questions that you can answer on there as well. And it'd be really helpful for Letitia and I, because we'll be using your responses to cultivate a better TA session in the future. Maybe, something like I'll let you guys join the Zoom section or something like that. Okay, there'll be a lot of choices. So please answer it. It's also not very long. Really shouldn't take anything more than 7 or 8 minutes. So yeah, I'll really appreciate it if you guys can do it for me. And all right, the due date is next Friday, although it's not like due, it's just, it will end there. So yeah, please take some of your time to do it. Thank you very much, all right? So now let's head back to our questions. And I've also decided to, before I begin, to show you guys the questions first. And after we answer it, I will also put the answers on the screen somehow. Except you see on my portal, this is the whatchamacallit, instructor portal. So if I click into it, it's not like how you'd see, actually it shows the answer, but yes, that's fine. Okay, so the questions that we will begin with are about Deborah, where she is at the casino and playing roulette. And according to this roulette, there are 17 red slots, 17 black slots, and 2 green slots. Okay. So the first question is asking for whether if the consumer, let me stop sharing the screen. Yeah, the first question is asking the expected value, and the second question is asking whether if she's risk loving, averse, or neutral. So coming back to doing this, so that would be the answer. And the next problem is asking whether if she's risk loving, risk neutral, or risk averse. And the fact that she is making a expected value that's negative, which means, if she, let's say she does this again and again, and in the end, on average, she'd be losing money. But she is still buying it, suggests that she definitely likes to take risks, right? She likes it, even in the case of this where, she's making a negative expected value, she is still buying it. So she has to be risk loving. Okay, next question. It's asking just general questions about true and false about risk averse customers, risk neutral customers, and risk loving customers. So question 3 is saying that a risk averse consumer has increasing marginal utility. Okay. Now, when you encounter this, you might realize it's wrong, you might realize it's right. It's it's not very easy to tell. Okay, so I think for something like this, it's good to just get the idea into your head that first of all, risk neutral, it just means you have a constant marginal utility. Okay, and then we have that on your graph. Your risk neutral would just be a linear line that looks like this. Now, if you're risk averse, okay, it's gonna be a concave line. That would look something like this, right? That would be your risk averse. And your risk loving will be something that looks like this. That would be convex. So this would be how it looks like on a graph. And later we are going to go more in depth as to what the graph means. But just for this question, if it's asking if a risk-averse consumer has increasing MU, no, right? Actually, he would have a decreasing. So sometimes you might see a, let's say a UX, okay, that looks like this. So we could also express it as x to the power of 0.5, right? And this, if you take a look at it, you'll automatically know that this is a risk-averse consumer. Why? Well, because the power here is less than 1, okay? And the power is less than 1. If you want to do it, sure, you could just use this and you find the marginal utility, which is the derivative of u of x. That's going to give you 0.5 x to the power of negative 0.5, which is 0.5 over x, right? Something like this. But you can see that it is clearly going to be decreasing because your x actually has a negative x. So this would clearly be decreasing. And this would also mean that it's a risk averse consumer. Now, if your power is equal to x, then that means x to the power of 1. That's just going to be a, but for here, you know, that's a linear line, right? Just like this, a linear line. And if you take the mu, well, the mu is just the derivative of that, which effectively gives you 1, right? Or pretty much just a constant line. And that would suggest that it is risk neutral. And last but not least, if the u of x is, let's say, x to the power of anything with the power greater than 1, okay, so then we can even do x to the power of 3, and then our mu would be 3x to the power of 2. This is risk loving. How do we know that? Well, what it means is that it's the more money or the more return you get, your utility is going to increase even greater than that. Okay, so let's come back to what this means on the graph. Because I feel like if we don't cover this in relationship to the graph, it might be hard to answer all these questions quickly. So let's come back to the graph. First of all, we have our risk neutral. It would always be a linear line. And what this means is that the rate at which, and also actually let me put this side is utility, or u of x, and this side is a return, okay, or in other words, expected value. Now, what a linear line means is however much your return increases, you'll get the same feeling in terms of utility. All right, so let's say you earned, this point is 500, this point is 1,000. Okay, so you manage to double it from 500 to 1,000. That's a good return. And in your heart, you also feel like it's a good utility. They're the same thing, okay? This thing is double, your utility also doubles. So that is risk neutral. Then we have risk averse, okay? Risk averse is somewhat different. Risk averse means however much your return increases, the amount of utility that you get actually does not increase as much. Okay, so we could take a look at something, let's say here. to here. Now, imagine if this point is 500 as well, and this point is, let's say, 2000, okay? So your return increases by 1,500. Your return actually went from 500 to 2,000, so it quadrupled, right? But the amount of utility, or in other words, the amount of satisfaction you get from this is actually much less than that. If you would just compare the length of the arrows, right, you see, if you quadruple that, maybe you only doubled that, okay? So if it went from 500 to 2,000 in terms of return, for your utility, it might have only went from 500 to 1,000. So that would be an example of risk averse. In other words, it just means that even if you have a high return, okay, you don't feel that good, okay, because it's too risky. And the other part would be risk loving. Risk loving would be a convex curve, right? And what this means is the opposite of risk averse. Risk loving suggests that even if your return goes up by, let's say, just a bit, okay, your return goes up by just a bit, from this point to this point, just went up by a bit, your utility would actually go up by a lot, okay? So because you enjoy taking the risk. See, even if I tell you, buying this would only get your return from 20 bucks to 25, in your heart, you would still want to take it because it feels good. It gives you more utility than just $5. Okay, it might give you what would be equivalent of $20 in your heart. So that would be risk loving. So if we go to question 4, no, first question 3, a risk averse consumer has increasing marginal utility. That is false. Okay, he would have decreasing marginal utility. Question 4 asks, a risk neutral consumer is willing to pay a positive risk premium to avoid risk. Okay, so this is quite interesting, right? What it means is, if you're risk neutral, would you want to pay extra to protect your goods? And intuitively, you might think, if I'm risk neutral, it doesn't really matter, right? I don't care if I take the risk or not. I'll be indifferent. Indifferent to taking or not taking the risk. And so if I'm indifferent, I don't really care. It also just means that I wouldn't want to pay extra. Okay, so for this question, the answer is false. A risk neutral consumer would not. Only a risk averse consumer would be willing to pay that premium. Okay, and we can express the premium on a graph like this. It's effectively what it means on a graph like this, the premium is, first of all, we would have a risk neutral line. That would be the line that we basically have as a benchmark. We would also have a risk averse line. And what it means is that, imagine if you, for the risk neutral person, you have a return of this much, okay? Now, that gives you so much an amount of utility or satisfaction. Let's call that amount N. Now, at this part, you'll see that your risk-averse consumer doesn't really operate with this risk-neutral consumer, because in order for the risk-averse person to generate the same utility, he honestly doesn't need that much return. Okay, he just needs this little an amount of return. And this amount would be what would be enough to give him a utility of N. Okay. So where would your risk premium lie in terms of this? Your risk premium is just going to be the difference between here and here. Okay, between the return of your risk neutral line and the return of a risk averse line. It would just be this much, because what it just means is that the difference that a person would be willing to take in order to handle the risk, or in this case, it's just the difference between the returns. That third part is asking whether a risk neutral consumer would have a linear utility function. I mean, we already drew the graph. You should know pretty much by now that a risk neutral consumer would have a linear utility function. And that just means true, okay? Now, be careful, because she might ask you something, instead of it being utility, she asks you marginal utility. And in that case, it might not make sense, okay? So, if she asks you, I mean, technically it does, because if she says it's a linear marginal utility, well, because you see here, it's a, for your utility, it's a linear graph. For a marginal utility, or the derivative of this, it would just be a constant line. So I guess it's still technically linear. But if she asks you that, for something like instead of risk neutral, she asks you something about risk loving or risk averse, then that might not apply. Okay, so be careful. Sometimes she might switch it from utility to mu, and in that case, just take the derivative of, a hypothetical line. Remember that risk averse, we could say x to the power 0.5 because the power is less than 1. The utility. So the marginal utility would be less than 0. And risk neutral, well, the x to the power 1 marginal utility would be equal to 0. And lastly, risk loving, x to the power, let's say 2, and therefore marginal utility would be greater than 0. All right. So the answer here is true. And question 6. It's saying a risk-loving consumer has a convex utility function. Yeah, that's right. Now, when I did this question, I guess the hardest part is realizing what concave and convex meant, because I sort of forgot from high school. But concave is something sloped down. Okay? It's like a bow under, right? And convex would be something sloped up. Or not like sloped up, it's just something facing up. Let me reiterate that. So if you check these graphs, right? This is neutral for sure. This is concave, right? Because it's sloped down, concave. That's risk averse. And here it's sloped up or facing up. Then that's risk loving. Answer here would also be true for question 6. And lastly, for question 7, it's saying a risk-averse consumer can increase her expected utility by buying multiple stocks. Well, yes. I mean, this is something that everybody who does stocks should do. Diversifying your portfolio. You don't just buy stocks with specific stock. You could buy some ETFs as well, so that you would reduce your risk. You're not betting on one thing, and if that one thing just ends up becoming a bust, then your whole portfolio is destroyed, right? You don't want that to happen, so you want to diversify. And especially if you're risk averse, okay? Because if you're risk averse, you wouldn't want the risk to take place in one scenario. Okay, this would be very bad for you. You don't want it to be all in one stock if you hate this risk. If you have it in, let's say, 5 different stocks, each of them have risks, yes, but add together, this is not as much risk as betting it on one stock, right? Because even if 2 of them does badly or 3 of them does badly, you might still have 2 that does well. So risk becomes lower. In the end, For this question, the answer will be true as well. You will want to buy multiple stocks with outcomes not being much related. Okay. Question 8. Let me actually show the screen. So question 8 is this graph. And let me put it in on here. So first of all, as you can see, this graph is clearly concave. It's facing down, the blue line. So that means that this is a risk-averse scenario. The consumer is a risk-averse person. And we also have a linear line that is the benchmark. Okay, actually, this is not a good graph. Just bear it. Okay? The distance between here and here is too little. But yeah, we'll just do it with it. And this would be the risk neutral line. Although do remember that in this scenario, the consumer's line is the risk averse one. We won't be using the risk neutral line that much, but it is also very important. Okay. And let me also fill in the numbers. So here is 28. 8. Here is 17. 14. Okay. So stop screen share, coming back. See by now I've drew a makeshift graph on my sheet. Now the first question is asking you to calculate the expected value, which is just finding the profit, right? Now, as you see here, the expected value, or you would have to be using the different proportions. If you don't use proportions, then this thing doesn't make sense because we're trying to find expected value. Expected value means this is something you expect for the future, right? And if it's certain, then what's the point in expecting this? So we have a 20%, or in other words, 0.2 chance that the company will succeed and the investment will be worth 100K, okay? Very good. And a 80% chance that the investment will fail and it would only be worth 5,000. So to find the expected value, this times that, okay? This would be 20,000 plus this would be this 5,000, 4,000, and that gives us 24,000. That's our expected value. There we go. All right, so the answer to the first question, 24K, that would be multiple choice number C. Okay, we're just circle. Now the question exists: how much is what is the most that Alex would consider paying for this investment? So what would he most consider to pay? So this is the time where we go back to the graph, and specifically we have to use both the risk averse and risk neutral line. Okay, so both of them exist for a reason. Now, if you take a look, our expected value is what? 24,000, right? And this is written in thousands. 24,000 is here. It refers to this line. Now, if you see this line, if you head up, right, it intersects the risk neutral line at 14. What is this side again? This side is utility, right? This side is return or expected value. So it's this return or expected value of 24,000 goes up, and for a risk neutral consumer, that means that the consumer would get a utility of 14. Okay, let me say that again. If a risk neutral, getting an expected value of 24,000 gives you a utility of 14. Make sense? And you might ask, well, so what? I know the utility is 14, but now using this utility of 14, you want to check it for your consumer because your consumer is no risk neutral individual. He is risk averse, right? If you're risk averse, then to get the same utility of 14, you don't need no 24 expected value. You just need 22, right? So we get the utility through this of 14, and we check, oh, actually on our risk averse line, 14 utility for a risk averse consumer just means I need to get 22 of a return. So this just means that this is the most that the consumer is willing to pay for this investment, right? Another way to look at it is that if you're risk averse, you want the price that you would be paying, or 22,000, to be less than your expected value, because it just means you want to pay less than the possibility of getting this expected value, right? In that case, you're sort of making a profit, right? You're paying 22,000 for something that's technically worth 24,000. Because you're risk averse, so you need it to be like so, okay? You need it to be such that your payout is greater than your payment in order for you to even consider it. If you're risk neutral, then you would be fine with paying 24 to get 20. And if you're risk loving, it means that any of these numbers here, or anything above 24, you do it as well, okay? Even if you're paying 29,000, you would still, for an expected value of 24,000, you would still want to do it because you like taking the risk. You like the idea that, oh, maybe I could get it 100,000. Okay, so the next question, let me first say, for this question, the answer is 22,000. That's the second choice. This is question 9. So then for question 10, it's asking the risk premium. And the risk premium, remember that I told you maybe 15 minutes ago, it's just the difference between here and here, or the difference between here and here. Okay, that's 24K minus 22K, so 2,000. Right? And that's your risk premium. Now you might say, you might ask, what does this really mean, right? What is the risk premium in this case? So there's like two ways in which you define risk premium. First, that you might use the premium in the sense of insurance, and the other is in the sense here, which pretty much means the benefits or the profit that you get with this investment. Okay, they actually refer to the exact same thing, but they're used in sort of different settings. So I'm going to write both of them here. Today, we're thinking about it in the perspective of profit. Okay, with profit, we're just saying, oh, we're paying 22,000 for something that is actually worth 24,000, right? As a risk-averse consumer, that's fine. I pay less for a greater turnout. That's ideal. So we're just trying to find how much exactly is the difference between the payout and the payment. The payout is 24,000 because your expected value for this investment is 24K. Your payment is just 22. That is the max you want to pay. So your profit, or in other words, premium, would just be this, which is 2,000. Okay. All right, next question, question 11. So let me share the screen with you guys as well. So Leo owns 1 share of Antares, and blah, blah, blah. Stock is 100 per share. Believe that there's a chance of 50% recall, where the stock price will go down to 50. Okay, so the first part is asking us to calculate the expected value. And again, expected value just means what you expect the stock to be worth given the probabilities of something happening. And here, the chance of something good happening, where like something like the stock currently trades at 100, the chance of it maintaining this would be 50%, right? So 0.5 times 100. Oh, and the other case, wherein you have to recall the chips, the stock price goes down to 50. So you add another 0.5%, 0.5 times, or 50%, and that's 50. So you get this 50 plus 0.5 times 50, 25. That's 75. That's your expected value. Okay. Very good. Next one. Your minimum price that you want to sell this share. Okay, so this is one of the harder problems here. And what you do is it's sort of similar to the beginning what you did with the expected value actually, except there's a gist to it, right? So to find your minimum price you're willing to accept, you sort of have to, if you check to this graph, or you have to link it to utility. And using that, you then find this price. What we're doing here is the same. You also have to link it with utility, and specifically, you plot the numbers in by utility. So the first part of what we're going to do is we're going to find the expected utility. All right, and expected utility is first there's a 0.5% chance, 50% chance that the stock stays the same, and that's $100 per share. But remember, our utility is the square root of x. So in that case, it would be the square root of 100, not simply 100. Okay, so this is utility when the stock price stays the same. The next one is the utility when the stock price goes to half, right? Again, it's also 50% of a chance, but now if the stock price goes to half, then this becomes 50. So your utility would be the square root of 50. That gives you an expected utility of 0.5 times 10 plus 0.5 times, let me put the calculator on the screen. $7.07, okay? Now you add that, that's equal to 5 plus 0.5 times 707, which is 3.535, okay? 3.535, here we go, and we add that, it gives 8.5. Okay, so here you have your expected utility. Having this is fine, but you'll realize that the numbers are vastly different from what you see, right? So what you want to do here is that you don't just end up with this, okay? Your expected utility is not going to get you anywhere. But you have to go back to your utility function. Okay, your utility function is the square root of x, right? So what you're going to do now is that you're going to reverse that. Sure, now you have linked it to utility. Okay, you've linked it to this utility. And you're going to find the price that it corresponds to. And to get that, you want to reverse what you did with utility. So let's take a look. Here, when you did utility, right, it's a square root. So what would be the way to reverse that? Well, what would be the opposite of a square root? It would be a square, right? X to the power of 2. But that would be the direct opposite of square root. So that's exactly what you do here. You take a look, 8.535, and that's not exactly it. The square of that, however, would be exactly 8.535 to the power of 2 gives you 72.85, okay, which is very close to 72.86, right? That is your answer, 72.86. If you have more decimals, it would be 72.86. So that is the minimum price that the consumer is willing to accept.
So what this question essentially means, you take a look. Assume Leo has a utility function u of x equals to x power 0.5, right? Where actually our x in this case would just be price. When you found the utility, the expected utility, I think. When find an expected utility, okay, you chose to square root, right? Now, if you are to find the price back in there, the x, you reverse the square root by squaring it. And that would give you the answer. So just a heads up. Sometimes instead of giving you a risk-averse consumer, she might give you a risk-loving consumer, where let's say the u of x is equal to x to the power of 3. And if you do that, you find your expected utility, sure, okay? You can't end like that, though. You have to somehow reverse this to get it to a number that is fairly consistent with your original expected value. Remember, right, that here we originally got an expected value of 75, and later we found a price of 72.86, which is actually very close to that. And if you know that, if you do a question, you see that your expected value is very close to a minimum price or a maximum price, depending on the question, that probably means that you did it correct. But if the number is vastly different, like from 75 and 8.535, then that means that you definitely did it wrong. So in the case that it's cubed, to reverse it, what would you do? Any ideas to reverse this? Any ideas to reverse this? If you're cubed, yeah?
Should be to the power of 1/3.
Yeah, okay, very good. You get it to the power of 1/3, in other words, you cube root it, right? And that would be the way to go. So you gotta be careful with these questions. You can't just get the expected utility and think that's it. You also have to link it back to what actually you also have to link it back to your final price by reversing what you did with utility. Now, lastly, let me ask you guys this. What about for a risk neutral consumer? We have u of x equal to x, right? Linear. What would be in that case? What are you going to reverse? So this is a trick question. You don't need to reverse anything. Because what this means is that however much your expected value goes up, however much your utility will go up, they're the same numbers. U of x equals to x. That means the number you input is the same as the number you get. That would also just be this line, right? I mean, actually, but this line is linear, but you see, it's not exactly the same. So I should also say that risk neutral, you might have a coefficient before it, like maybe it's 0.5x or something like that. But the point is that it's linear, and in that case, with a power of 1, okay, you shouldn't. Yes.
I just want to like, why do we reverse it to find?
Okay. Let me first explain this part, okay? And I'll get back to you. It's a good question. So if it's 0.5 to the power of x, sure, you don't reverse it with exponents, but you would have to reverse it with the coefficient. So when you're finding this, if u of x is 0.5 times x, then you have to reverse it by doing 2 times whatever the expected utility you get. However, she would pretty much never ask you a question like that because it's going to mess up 90% of the class. They haven't seen it before. So that's just something to know. So somebody raised a question here, and that's why are we reversing the utility, right? Well, let's cut back to utility. Ux equals to the square root of x. that means your expected utility, or your utility, is the square root of your x, which is price, right? Your expected return, or either 100, or 50, depending on the scenario. You managed to find the expected utility by adding up the expected returns of the two possibilities. Okay, so expected utility is equal to 0.5, 100 plus 0.5, 50, right? Two different instances, either this or that, and you get 8.535, right? You do know why we did these numbers, right? Okay. So you get your expected utility. But just having this, that doesn't show you your price, right? That just shows you some sort of utility. And it comes back to this equation, what it means. What this equation means, utility is the square root of your return, or the square root of your price. So if you want to find your price, shouldn't you, let's say you put this number here, 0.535, shouldn't that be equal to the square root of your price? Your minimum price in this case, right? That would be the 8.535, the square root of P. So P equals to 8.535 squared. So to come that again, if knowing this relationship, right, that utility equals to the square root of your return price, if we manage to find an expected utility using the two different scenarios, and we later want to use this to find our minimum price, shouldn't we have to reverse it by using the square root and using the square? Because previously it was square rooted, so now to reverse that you have to square. Did that somewhat help? Any other questions about this part? I hope you didn't just nod because it's mandatory. It helps? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in other words, if you do this to find the expected utility by using the square root, later you want to find the price back again, you need to reverse the relationship. Okay, you can't just use 8.525 to find a number. That's your expected utility. That's not the price given this expected utility. To find that price, you need to use this relationship again, and specifically you need to reverse it because before you square root, right now you have to square it. Oh, and question 13, Leo's risk premium, and here the risk premium is also the difference between your expected value minus your minimum price. So that's just $75 minus 72.86, which is 200. All right, last question, 14. So the last question is very interesting. It's not too hard, but it does become a bit complicated. So let's begin with that. Question 14 talks about a supermarket chain which will open a store in the city. And it would either choose to, now the way I'm going to put it like this is, I get sort of good for game theory, which you guys will learn in a week or two, because you'll see something like this. You could either choose to open a big market or a small market. And given the cases of demand being good or demand being bad, you also get different numbers. Now, I would not continue with this because it's too complex, but I will show, no, this is good, this is good, this is bad, this is good, bad. But this will be something that you guys will be drawing it's called like a, I don't know, a tree or something. It would be something you guys would draw during the next chapter or so, and well, no, you won't draw it, but you would do questions about it, and it's fairly interesting. Now, the better way to express it instead of this tree would just be your normal everyday, something like this. If you have high demand, which is 50%, or you have low demand, 50%. And you can either choose to open a big store or a small store. If it's a big store, you get 100. But if it's low demand, you get 40. If it's a small store, high demand, you get 75. Low demands. Okay. And they're asking, the question here is asking about whether the supermarket should buy information from this consulting company that has very good knowledge about the market. And what that means is that if you buy the knowledge, if you buy this intel, then you'll be able to know if you have high demand or low demand. And the question here is, what's the max price that the supermarket would be willing to buy this intel for? Okay, so to do a question like this, the first thing you do is to find the expected value given a circumstance. Now, let me ask you guys, would it be the expected value of a big market, a big supermarket, or expected value of a small supermarket? Or does it mean expected value of the demand being high? Or expected value of demand being low? Which one makes more sense? Which expected value groups are you trying to find? Any ideas? So you guys can just attempt this through sort of just trying it out. If you try out this part, it'd be fine. So you do that later. But if you try out this part, you'll come up to something that's sort of weird. And you'll realize, okay, so if I know for certain that the demand is high, good. But if I try to find the expected value, well, I don't really know the probability of the person opening a big market. Okay? Because the market, the question actually doesn't say 50% or some sort of percent exactly. We don't know. It honestly might be like there's 80% that he opens a large market, and the 20% that he opens a small market. But the question does not provide it. So when we're trying to find expected value for this and that, without the probability, you can't really do anything. You don't know what probability is. So this is none. Okay. Instead, knowing that the circumstance being you opening a big supermarket or a small supermarket, and then finding the expected value based on that would be more helpful. Because you have the probabilities of what's the chance of a high demand happening or a chance of a low demand happening in the market. So let's see, and another way to look at this is if you're at the supermarket, right? You have control over whether if you make a big one or a small one. So because that's something you can control, you would get something like you can get an expected value based on it. But you can't control whether if the demand in the local area is high or low. And therefore, you also can't get a very adequate result for your expected value unless if the market tells you exactly, oh, there's an 80% chance that demand is high, a 20% chance that demand is low. So coming back, EV of a big market would be 0.5 times 100 plus 0.5 times 40, which is 50 plus 20 equal to 70. And the expected value of a small market is 0.5 times, what is it, 75 plus 0.5 times 60, that's 37.5 plus 30 equal to 67. Okay, So you have expected value for big being $70, meaning that if you open a supermarket, if you open a big supermarket, you tend to get $70 on average. And for a small market, it'd be 67.5. Now, guys, let me ask you here. If you don't know what the demand looks like, okay, whether if it's high demand, low demand, you don't know. Which one will the market choose? The supermarket, which one will it choose? A big one or a small one? Any idea? If you don't know how the demand in the market plays out, all you know is just you could choose to open a big market or a small market. Would you open a big one or a small one? Well, the answer is fairly apparent. If you open a big one, you get 70 on average. If you open a small one, you get 67.5 on average. So every case, you would choose to open a big one. Okay? That would be the one you choose because it gives you on average more return. Now, sure, you can say, I think, if the demand is bad, then you might be better off with a small market. You're true, you're right. Okay, but if we just find the expected value here and here, 70 is better than 67.5. There also exists a chance that, there's high demand, and in that case, getting 100 is clearly getting better than 75. So you would always take big over small. Right? Not too much related to this question, but you'll see why I mentioned it. Now, the second part as to how to do this question is that you find the maximum expected value. And how you define the maximum expected value? Well, you consider it by circumstance. So let's take a look. If we have high demand, would opening a big market or a small market, which one is better?
The big one.
Yes. That gives you 100. And what's the probability of high demand happening? 50%, right? So 0.5, 100. The other one, 50% for low demand. But which one gives you better in a low demand scenario?
Smaller one.
Very good. So that's 60. And you add that, that's 50 plus 30 equals 80. So that means your actual max possible expected value is 80, depending on whether it's high demand and low demand. And how are you going to satisfy this? Well, with higher information about the market, right? Because you see, if you don't know, then you can't really, if you don't know if you're going to have high demand or low demand, you can't make these adjustments. Only if you know them, can you then make these adjustments? Okay, so that would be actually with the intel. You are capable of getting this. To say that again, with this intel, you're aware of if high demand or low demand is going to occur in the market, and therefore you could choose to open a big one or a small one, and whichever one is more fitting given the demand. But if you don't have access to this information, you would still get an expected value maximum being 70. So you don't use 67.5, you want to use 70 because that's the larger expected value you'll get without this intel. Okay, it's the largest here between 70 and 67.5, meaning that every case you're still going to make a big supermarket. Right, because it gives a better expected value. So without having access to this information, you still on average get 70 in returns. But with the information, you get 80. So what is the max you'd be willing to pay?
$10.
Yeah, it's the difference. So max willing to pay. It's the difference, and that would be 80 minus 7. So $10. And another way to look at it is if you earn $80 with access to the information, you're actually not earning 80. Right? That's the amount, but remember you still have a cost. And the cost comes from buying the Intel. So if the cost is anything that's less than 10, then sure, because let's say even if it's at 10, you would still get a profit of 70, right? You still get a profit of 70, that would be equivalent to EV big, expected value of a big supermarket, only making those. And that means that at least your deal wasn't like a loss, right? Yet if your cost is something above 10, maybe 12, maybe 15, maybe 20, then your profit is going to be less than 70. So you would actually just be better off if you stick with opening a big supermarket, because that would have given you a higher return on average. So we're actually done with everything here, but a couple of things. First, I want to explain question 1 again, because I did a really bad job explaining it, I feel like. But it's also not hard, so it's like, yeah. So question 1 again, you see, the question sort of reminds you that the expected value of Deborah's bet after subtracting the $1. So this is the part I sort of missed, which made me a bit confused when doing the question. What it actually means, right, if you subtract the $1, then remember the question was something like this. First, you have 17 out of 36 red ones, 17 out of 36 black ones, and 2 out of 36 green ones. And it's saying, Deborah wagered on black, right? So she has a 13 out of 36 chance of getting that. But that also means that you have a 17, also 17 here, plus 2, so 19 over 36 chance of not getting, right? So the expected value after subtracting the $1 wager would therefore be equivalent to 17 out of 36 times, so this is in the case of good if you get black, and that's $2 minus 1. Okay, $2 is your return, $1 is plus 17 plus 2, so 19 out of 36 times, what is it? Your wager is $1, right? But your return is actually 0. So we return 0 minus your wager. This becomes 17 out of 36 times 1 plus 19 out of 36 times -1. And that's 2 out of 36 times, yeah, that's just 2 out of 36, right? Because it's 17 out of 36 minus 19 out of 36. 2 out of 36, 1 out of 18, that is around 6%. And another, like the other possibility that I see she asking this question is she's asking the expected value without doing the subtraction part, which is also very common, okay? In that case, your expected value is, so you just don't minus this. Okay, your expected value is 17 out of 36, 2, plus 19 out of 36, 0. Okay, and that's going to give you 34 out of 36, which is going to equal to 0.94-ish. That is your expected value. It's sure. But, you see, you put in a wager of $1. And you are only expected to get 94 cents of that back. So you're making a loss, aren't you? Right? If you put in $1, but your expected value is actually only 94 cents, then you're making for each wager that you do a 6-cent loss. So that would also correspond to this negative 0.06 as sustained. Right. Now, I know it's roughly an hour now, and I did all the questions. Really, there wasn't that many today. But I've decided to help you guys a bit more by doing some other hard questions from another professor. And I'm not sure if Professor Coughlin necessarily would ask this question on the exam, but I think it's good practice. So let me pull up my slide. That slide to share. This. No, not this. So it works on Zoom, but it's too many projections. All right, there we go. Particular question from Professor Odilon Kamara. And this question looks like this. Expensive Microeconomic Books is a publishing company that sells microeconomic books in the US and Asia. And the demand functions look like that, right? Have you guys seen a question like this before? Where there's two separate demand functions? No, right? So, I mean, that's sort of the reason why I pulled it up. I don't know if she's going to ask it. It does seem like this Odilon Kamara tends to ask harder questions than our professor. But I think it's still good to know how to do them. And the idea here, so let me ask you guys this. It's not hard to tell that, at least, that what sort of question is this? Is this a perfect competitive market? Is this a monopoly? Is this a what? Any idea? So you see, you have a demand curve, you have an MC, you have. Well, if you, I mean, it doesn't list a marginal revenue, so maybe you can't tell. But what sort of what is this? This is a monopoly? Is this perfect competitive? Any ideas? You know, I think it's fairly straightforward. Maybe you guys are looking this far, but it says price discriminate. Price discriminate. So this must be a monopoly. All right. Now, the part A, it says suppose they cannot price discriminate on each person. So this is actually a single price monopoly, which you guys have seen before. But question B, suppose they can price discriminate. Well, if you can price discriminate, then it must be one of the first, second, third degree, or intertemporal peak load pricing and two-part tariff, right? What does this sound like? Where you have, a different demand curve and therefore a different marginal revenue for each region. What is this? First degree? Is it? No, second degree? Second degree is quantity. First degree is the max that each person can handle. What about third degree? Is it third degree? Yes. Okay, it's third degree because you price it based on different attributes of customers, which in this case is location. Right. So I suppose we can get going with this question then. Let me share my screen. Now, let's see. Do you want me to keep that question up there on the back? But this side, I show my screen. Okay. Not sure. So, Professor Odilon Kamara is from Sao Paulo in Brazil. which is also the birthplace of Letitia. But she's not here, so I don't even know why I said that. But question 10. Expensive microeconomic books. Oh, shit. Expensive microeconomic books. And we have a demand curve, US being 76 minus PUS, Asia, so US and Asia. Asia being 84 minus PA. We also get the cost function.
Oh, we can.
I know, I'll show you soon, because I'm just copying the question. It also provides for marginal cost, and Q equals to QUS. All right. So suppose that you cannot price discriminate. But this is still a monopoly, okay? This is not to say that it is a perfectly competitive market. What it means when it says that you can't price discriminate is that you just can't charge prices differently per customer. But it is still a monopoly. It will be a single price. Okay? And if it's a single price monopoly, what's the formula you use? NAU. Now I know it's past spring break, so nobody really remembers this, but your exam is also coming up in a week. So this would be something that's helpful. What's the formula in a single price monopoly? Anyone? There's no risk of giving the wrong answer. Any? P equals MC? MR equals MC? Anything? It would be MR equal to MC, right? This is just good to know. And if you see that, you might be able to realize that MC is already given. So now it's just to find MR. But MR isn't necessarily that easy to find. Okay. So we first of all, we take a look at these two equations, QUS, QA. You also find that in a single price market, okay, where you cannot price discriminate, your quantity, it therefore shouldn't be separated into US and A, right? It should be QUS plus QA as the question provides. Because this means that you're talking about the market for everybody. You're not dividing the market into different regions and pricing it differently based on that. You're talking about the price being the same in all regions. So if you see this, you actually want to add them. So Q is going to equal to 76 minus PUS plus 84 minus PA. Okay, which is 160 minus PUS minus PA. And that's your Q. So now the question becomes, what do you do by this stage? Well, you see, you do have MC equals to Q. So somehow, you do have MC equals to Q. And you know that when you do MR equals to MC, you need to find it such that P, you use P equals to some sort of Q equals to Q, right? So let's come back to this. If this is a single price market, would there be any difference between PUS and PA? Or are they the same value? They're the same value. So the way to express that would just be 160 minus 2p. We can just say it. Okay? We have this Q equals to 160 minus 2p. We want to convert it into P equals to some sort of Q. 2p equals to 160 minus Q. P equals to 80 minus Q over 2. And revenue equal to P times Q, which is 80Q minus Q over 2 Q, which is 80Q minus Q squared. So marginal revenue is equal to 80 minus Q. You have marginal revenue equals to this. MR equals to MC. 80 minus Q equals to Q. So 2Q equals to 80. Q equals 40. That is the total quantity of which you'll be producing. All right. And given that this is your Q, now what is your price going to be? Well, we have an equation, right? P equals to 80 minus Q over 2. So we just plug it in there, and you'll get P equals to 80 minus 40 over 2, which is 60. That's your price. Now, let me ask you this. If you get Q equals 40, can you plug it into here or here? Can you plug it into UPUS or PA, like any of these equations?
No.
No, because that's in the case of there being price discrimination. Here there isn't, so you're just going to plug it into the formula that you found that's the same for both, which is P equals 80 minus Q over 2, and with that you're going to get Q. Okay. Next part. Coming back to the question, the next part is something about if you can price discriminate. So that means that you would have to be using this and that. You will have to be using these different equations. Okay. So how are we to do that? Well, it honestly isn't too different, but it does become a bit strange, right? So, first of all, let me remind you guys with this. 40 equals to Q. Q equals to QUS plus QA. So, whatever the number you get for QUS, whatever the number you get for QA, that is also just going to be, if you add that together, that is also just going to be Q, which is 40. But now there exists a question as to how you would be able to get that using this equation. So we could try some different steps, and you see if we choose to use Q equals to this and this, well, doesn't seem to work. Or if we choose to go for it independently, QUS equals to 76 minus PUS equals 76 minus QUS, PQ equals to so revenue equals to P over Q equals 76Q minus Q squared. So MR is 76 minus QQ and QUS. And likewise, Q Asia is equal to 84 minus P Asia. P Asia is equal to 84 minus Q Asia. Revenue is equal to 84Q minus QA squared. So marginal revenue is 84 minus QQ. So now you're getting something, but it doesn't seem like it's complete because we now need to link it to MC, right? And if you link it to MC, well, remember MC is equal to Q, which is equal to QUS plus QA. And that's equal to, well, first we do know it's equal to 40, but we don't really want to put that here in it yet. Or, I mean, you could, and it actually would just help you solve the question. But let's say if we don't know what Q is, because we didn't do this part yet, right? If you don't know what Q is, then you would have to input this entire part into your you have to input this entire part into your MR equals MC. Right? So 76 minus 2QUS equals to QUS plus QA. So you're going to get QA equals to 76 minus 3QUS. And here, MR equals MC as well. So 84 minus 2QA is equal to QUS plus QA. So 84 minus 3QA. If you get this, okay, it's not undoable. And this is actually the way you're going to solve this question. You have this and this, two different equations, and after that, you're just going to try to substitute. So 76 minus 3QUS equals to QA, and 84 minus 3QA equals to QUS. Sure. So let's say you use QUS equals to this part. So 76 minus 3, 84 minus, wow, 76 minus 84 minus QUS. So 84 minus 3QA. That's going to give you equal to QA. So 76 minus 3 times 84 is 252 plus 3QA plus QA. QA is equal to 252 minus 76 is 176, I believe. Yeah, 176. And you'll get that QA is equal to 22. P, therefore, will be equal to 84 minus PA. So QA equals to 84 minus PA, right? So PA will therefore be equal to 84 minus QA, 84 minus 22, that gives you 6. Likewise, if you know that QA is 22, you can just plug it into any of this, and you also get what QUS is. Let's say you plug it into here, 84 minus 322 gives you 18, and that is QUS. Knowing that, and the equation for QUS being 76 minus PUS, you can plug it in. 18 equals to 76 minus PUS. PUS is 58. Now, if you already know Q equals to 40, and you plug it in, it's even easier. I just chose not to do it because sometimes you won't get the Q that easily, and instead you would have to do it this way, which is sort of complicated, but it's honestly not the hardest thing ever that you'll learn in this class. Okay, so if you do know that Q is 40, though, you could just plug in 76 minus 2QUS equals to MC, which is Q, right? So 76 minus 2QUS equals to 40. QUS equals to 76 minus 40 over 2, so 18. It'll be the same for the other ones. And the last part of the question asks, compare prices with and without price discrimination. So you see, without price discrimination, your price is 60, quantity is 40. With price discrimination, for Asia, price is, yes, for Asia, your price would be 62, quantity is 22. For US, your price is, whatchamacallit, 58, Q is 18. And if you want to find the profit, for the profit, which is revenue minus cost, is 2,400 minus the cost. Cost being the formula 2.5 Q squared, so 1,600 times a half, so that's 800 equals to 1,600. And here the profit is, so 62 plus 22. Let me switch it up. 62 times 22, 1364 plus 58 minus your cost as well. And remember, the cost is the same because you're producing the same quantity. Minus 800, ta-da, you get 1608. All right. So you see, with price discrimination, you actually do earn a bit more than without, although not a lot. And it's asking, how do the elasticities of the market affect the firm's price choices and profits? And this sort of just goes back to the idea of if some good is particularly important to you, like it's a necessity, then it's inelastic. Right? And in the case that it's inelastic, that just means that even if you raise the price higher, people are still going to go buy it. Right? So in this case, it will be Asia where the textbook is more inelastic. Because it's more inelastic, so this corporation prices it at $62, right? And they're also, remember, selling more quantity. They're selling 22 out of 40 instead of 20. And for the US, the textbook is more elastic. In other words, it's not that important. People, like if you have your price high, nobody's really going to want to buy it. I mean, you could just pirate it offline, right? So in the case of that, you would have a price that's lower than 60 or original norm, and also a lower one. So that's the question that I want to show you guys, and it's also pretty much the end of this recording. Once again, please do the survey if you haven't, and it will end next week, but it will be really helpful if you do it for me. Thank you for coming here, and yeah, I'll see you next time.